Good morning, my dear students. Today I'm going to deliver a lecture on Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, a different kind of novel of 21st century. It's implying a different kind of techniques. So this is my second deliberation on this novel and the novelist James Joyce. So this is a kind of novel by the Irish writer James Joyce. It follows the intellectual, moral and spiritual development of a young Catholic Irish man. His name was Stephen Dedalus. And his struggle against the restrictions of his cultural what his culture imposes. It can be placed in the tradition of Bildungsroman, a novels that trace the personal development of a young Catholic Irish man, the protagonist from his childhood through adulthood. When we are talking about Bildungsroman, what is Bildungsroman? Bildungsroman is a novel of development and education. In this regard, Richard Ellen hoped that his portrait would be an autobiographical novel, because turning his life into fiction. So this is possible that when we are going through the storyline of the novel, we can understand. So this takes place in Ireland. Already I talked to you at the turn of the century. Young Stephen Dedalus, who comes from an Irish Catholic family, he is the oldest of 10 children, and his father is financially inept. Throughout the novel, Dedalus' family makes a series of moves into increasingly dilapidated home as their fortunes dwindle. His mother is a devout Catholic. When Stephen is young, he and the other Dedalus children are tutored by governess Dante, a fanatically Catholic woman. Dear Uncle Charles, who lives with the family, the book opens with a stream of consciousness, what I already talked, what is this kind of narrative is. So this book is also opened with a narrative filtered through a child's perspective. There is sensual imagery, the word approximating baby talk. We leap forward in time to see young Stephen beginning boarding school at Columbus. He is very young, terribly homesick, unathletic and socially awkward. He is an easy target for bullies, and one day he is pushed into a cesspool. He becomes ill from the filthy water, but he remembers what his father told him and does not tell on the boy. That Christmas he eats at the adult table for the first time. A terrible argument erupts over politics with John Casey and Stephen's father on one side and Dante on the other. Later that year, Stephen is unjustly hit by a prefect. He complains to the rector, winning the praise of his peers. Stephen is forced to withdraw from Cologne because of his family's poverty. The family moves to Blackrock, where Stephen takes a long walks with his Uncle Charles and goes on imaginary adventure with boys from around the neighborhood. When Stephen is a bit older, the family moves to Dublin, once again because of financial difficulties. He meets a girl named Fianna Clary, who is to be the object of his adoration right up until the end of the book. His father with a bit of charm, manages to get Stephen back into private schools. He is go to the Belvedere College along the institutions run by the Jesuits. Stephen comes into his own Belvedere, a reluctant leader and success, attracting an essay writing. Despite his position of leadership, he often feels quite isolated. He continues to be a sensitive and imaginative young man, acting in school plays, winning essay contests. He is also increasingly obsessed with the sex. His fantasies grow more and more and very lucid. Very, very lurid. Finally, one night he goes with a prostitute. It is his first sexual experience. Going with prostitutes becomes a habit. Stephen enters a period of spiritual confession. He considers his behavior sinful, but he feels oddly indifferent towards it. He cannot seem to stop going to prostitutes, nor does he want to stop. But during the annual spiritual retreat at Belvedere, he hears their fire sermons on the torments of hell. Stephen is terrified, and he repents of his old behavior. He becomes almost fanatically religious. After a time, this feeling passes. He becomes increasingly frustrated by Catholic doctrine. When a rector suggests that he consider becoming a priest, Stephen realizes that it is not the life for him. One day, while walking on the beach, he sees a beautiful girl. Her beauty hits him with the force of spiritual revelation, and he no longer feels ashamed of admiring the body. He will live life to the fullest. The next time we see Stephen, he is a student at university. University has provided valuable structure and new ideas to Stephen in particular. He has had time to think about the works of Aquinas and Aristotle on the subject of beauty. Stephen has developed his own theory of aesthetics. He is increasingly preoccupied with beauty and art. Although he has no shortage of friends, he feels isolated. He has come to regard Ireland as a trap, and he realizes that he must escape the constraints of nation, family, religion. He can only do that abroad. Stephen imagines his escape as something parallel to the flight of Daedalus. He escaped from his prison with wings crafted by his own genius. The book ends with the Stephen's leaving Ireland to pursue the life of a writer. So while discussing the entire storyline, the summary, what we have an idea about, it's an autobiographical. There are a lot of autobiographical structures, and if we are considering the thematic point of view, what are the themes? There are a lot of themes involved here. One is entrapment and constraint. Stephen eventually comes to see Ireland as a kind of trap, a restraint that will make impossible for him to live and create. Three major bounds: stricken family, nation, and the church. Stephen's family, increasingly destitute, is a source of frustration and guilt. He can do nothing to help them, and he continued inaptitude of his father exasperates Stephen. Though his father is an ardent nationalist, Stephen has great anxieties about Irish politics. He finds the Irish people fickle and ultimately disloyal. At one point, he says to a friend that the Irish have never had a great leader whom they didn't betray or abandon. He also rebels against the nature of activities like petition signing, protest. What is in his mind? These activities amount to an abdication of independence, At the same time, he leaves Ireland hoping to forge the new conscience of his race. There are themes like Catholicism. We have seen the Charles is perhaps the greatest constraint on Stephen and merits in its own entry. The teachings of the Charles run contrary to Stephen's independent spirit and intellect. His sensitivity to beauty and human body are not at all suitable to the rigid Catholicism in which he was raised. But the Charles continues to exert some small hold on him. Although he eventually became an unbeliever, he continues to have some fear that the Catholic Church might be correct. Despite his fears, he eventually chooses to live independently and without constraint, and even if that decision sends him to hell. Then there are theme of escape. Because escape is the natural complement to the theme of entrapments and constraint. Joyce depicts escape metaphorically by the book most important symbol of illusion, the mythical artificer of Daedalus. Daedalus is not at all the Irish name. Joyce looked the name for a mythical inventor who escaped from his island prison by constructing wings and flying to his freedom. So Stephen too will eventually escape from the island prison of Ireland. So he considers the entire Ireland as a prison and escaping, taking the name of the character of Daedalus, which is a eluded character. And there are another theme which is called independence. If we closely relate to the above theme, Stephen's move toward independence is one of the central movement of the novel. Then again, if we come to the beauty, another theme, beauty and sensitivity, imagination. What begins as sensitivity and imagination in the child Stephen eventually evolves into a near obsessive contemplation of beauty and the mechanics of art. Even as a child, young Stephen is an extraordinarily imaginative and sensitive boy. Eventually, these strong and unarticulated feelings that shape as a passion for the arts. In chapter 5, Stephen has developed a theory of aesthetics that is quite sophisticated for university students. He thinks carefully and very thoroughly about beauty and the power of art, and knows that he can do nothing else but pursue the life of a poet or a writer. So in this way, if we discuss the thematic concerns, we see the novel is a brilliant one where the theme of consciousness, the technique of stream of consciousness, and epiphany, these are some literary techniques which is very successfully used by James Joyce in the novel. Thank you very much.